Broadcasting live from the heart of Orlando, Florida. You are listening to the most electrifying show in media today, A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I am your host, David Gornoski, and it's great to be with you on this first show of A Neighbor's Choice on 102.5 WFLA, and I'm glad you could join me. The number to call if you'd like to speak is 407-916-5400. That's 407-916-5400 if you would like to call and speak today on the program. A Neighbor's Choice is a media project that I started to introduce the culture of Jesus back into the driver's seat of national conversation. I am tired. I don't know about you, but I am tired of watching a media that pits us against each other, a media that tells us that all we have to do is pick a group based on our gender or our race or our creed or some other collectivist identity, and then to fight at each other in the safety of that group. Well, Jesus taught us 2,000 years ago that the dignity of the person is paramount in a society that imitates his principles. And that's what I want to bring. You know, my father is a pastor, and I grew up watching him go to country churches all around Florida, and he worked with the poor, the downtrodden, and he didn't ever take the fancy churches or the churches that were the biggest paycheck provider. But he always went to the people who really needed. I call them the Johnny Cash crowd, the working class, men and women of all color and creed. And what was interesting about that experience growing up as a pastor's son is I realized that all of the problems we have in our society today can be solved if we simply take a step back and look at the principles that Jesus embodied in his life. And so at A Neighbor's Choice, whether it's my work, I write at columns at Daily Caller, Town Hall, WorldNet Daily, the Foundation for Economic Education. There's several websites that syndicate my column. And I always try to integrate the imitation of Jesus as the model. You know, we're always talking about role models. Everybody picks a side. You know, it's left versus right. It's team red versus team blue. But, you know, these things aren't solving us. I just saw today someone was, climbing the Statue of Liberty, and I think to myself, what's going on with this culture? It's falling apart at the seams. And it doesn't need to be this way. We can unite the country based on the respect for the dignity of the person and not group think. That's the problem I think is at the heart of our political and cultural divide. We are so obsessed with settling with group think. We don't want to think of our neighbor as ourselves. We don't want to love our neighbor as ourselves. We want to hide in tribes and take pot shots and do things that we wouldn't do normally as individuals, but we'll do them in the hidden ballot booth of a voting booth. We'll go ahead and say, whoa, I'll go hire this politician to go execute this law to tax the rich or, to force people through the barrel of a gun to redistribute their wealth so that we can be charitable to our neighbors. That's a perversion of the gospel of love and choice that Jesus introduced 2,000 years later. So what I do at A Neighbor's Choice is I don't care whether you're atheist, agnostic, whether you're religious, we all can do well if we rethink our position in history through the lens that Jesus embodied in his life. If we rethink our problems through what Jesus would do. And I know that is a cliche. I know that's not popular. I know that is not really in vogue right now. Some people say, oh, David, you could reach a more dynamic, sophisticated audience if you would just drop that word Jesus, right? Well, he's a historical person, and you still count your time. Here it is, 2018, in the year of Jesus, right? We split time based on this person. So even if you don't believe, as I do, I believe I'm a Christian, but if you don't believe in the religious side of the story of Jesus, you should still want to imitate and study his life and master the way he treated his neighbors as the social ordering principles that can set us free. And so that's my goal here on this show. I will be doing this each Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern here on 102.5 WFLA. And I'm going to be asking you to participate in applying the principles of Jesus to our problems in society, to help us unpack the different scandals. I'm not going to be reactive, folks. If you go to all the different media, whether it's TV or a lot of times on radio even, you hear a lot of programs where it's just all about blaming the other side, but it's always a reactive kind of passive stance. On A Neighbor's Choice, we're going to be proactive. We're going to talk about actual positive solutions instead of waiting on daddy or nanny state government. Please make healthcare a little bit more like this or this. No, let's just roll up our sleeves and solve the problem ourselves as neighbors, as persons, not as collective cogs and little tribes. We have to take the responsibility to put our skin in the game as neighbors in this community and to set the example of being the role model that Jesus was in his time and still is in history today. And so that's what we're going to be talking about on A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm excited about all the opportunities that we have to explore Jesus' principles in our society. So today I'll be speaking with the champion of liberty, former congressman from Texas and former presidential candidate, Congressman Ron Paul, who is the founder of the Campaign for Liberty. I'll be speaking with him about reflecting on the Declaration of Independence and where we are as a country with liberty and where we're headed in the future. And I look forward to that. That'll be later on in the show. So make sure you tune in and watch what Ron Paul has to say. He has been an inspiration to me, and I've always enjoyed everything that Ron Paul shares. So catch this in just a few minutes here on 102.5 WFLA. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice, folks. I am your host, David Gornoski, and someday, we're going to have a culture where we're not dependent on all these old, outdated tribal identities that the government and the media want to put us in. I'm just seeing here on drudgereport.com that Pruitt out at EPA. And I'm just wondering, when are we going to get out of the EPA together? Let's just abolish the EPA. I don't think we need a federal department to tell us how to run clean energy or to provide environmental advice. In fact, they end up putting people in cages, folks, for very nonviolent, petty things. And that's what happens to a society when you abandon the principles of the Jesus personhood revolution that was started over 2,000 years ago. So if you'd like to join in on the discussion, in just short time, we're going to have Congressman Ron Paul. And if you would like to be a part of the discussion now, 407-916-5400. That's 407-916-5400 if you'd like to call. And I can't stress this enough, how simple we can solve so many problems by just understanding how to imitate Jesus as persons, not as collective tribal identities. You know, and one of the things that has helped me get to this point in my life has been people who taught me radio. I actually was in radio for a short time in college. I would participate on a show by a dear friend who has since passed. His name is Jerry Hughes. And he was a beautiful voice for radio. He taught me a lot of things about liberty. He taught me humility. And it's something that I'm trying to imitate his example throughout my life. He recently passed away, but he was a great radio host, one of the most beautiful, booming voices you could ever hear, and I enjoyed him. And another friend who was also a guiding light in training me on radio back in college years was Scott Allen, who has also passed. But these were icons of radio, and they really understood their stuff, and they weren't stuck on identity politics. You know, there's identity politics on the left and the right, and it's something that always masks the truth. And it always allows us to kind of hide our obfuscation. It obfuscates our moral responsibility to love our neighbor as ourselves rather than to see them as an enemy other that must be vanquished. And that's what happens, folks, when we rely on the state to get our identity. We start to slink into groupthink. We start to think that, I can love my neighbor as myself on Sunday, or, when I'm just, little private friendship groups and cliques. But when it comes out to the politics, that's where I roll up my sleeves and I just go back to the way of, Caiaphas, that high priest. Remember Caiaphas? Caiaphas said when he was trying to gin up passion to execute Jesus, he said, "It is better that one man die than that the whole nation perish." And that's the kind of logic that the state has today. That's how the media operates. It's always about, let's just get in a group and let's sacrifice our rivals for our own good. And when we imitate personhood, as Jesus exemplified in his life, we'll see that it's not about that. It's about self-sacrifice. It's about mercy, not sacrifice. It's about our skin in the game, not our neighbor's skin in the game. And unfortunately, the media, they just make a living off of keeping us all doubting that that is a true reality. But history has proven that it is the true reality. And we are in the thralls of the personhood revolution 2,000 years later, and we're working it out. We're working it out as a collective. We're working out our salvation as a community, as a global population of people who are being infected with the power of loving our neighbors. And that's something that we have to work for every day. It's not something you just say a little prayer or say a little ritual or do something and then you're a Jesus guy. No, that's not how it works. You have to imitate him daily. And that includes your political activities. And it also includes your participation on juries. We don't have a lot of control over the swamp in D.C. At the end of the day, whoever we elect, look, the debt's still going up. We're in trillions of debt. We still have wars that we can't afford, wars we shouldn't be in. Why are we still in Afghanistan? What's going on over there? We're picking sides with every tribal fight over there, and it never, ever resolves itself. Here it is, years since 2001. And, we're in trillions of dollars of debt. We don't cut spending that much. Yes, Trump has done some good things with cutting taxes. He's cut regulations. But the debt is obviously going to be a problem if we don't get our heads straight on that. And so here we are. We're just always thinking, what do I do? I'll just vote for somebody else. I'll vote for Team Red or Team Blue. And meanwhile, nothing ever changes. Big business gets bigger. Our freedoms are always being curtailed. We're always on the precipice of some cultural meltdown because of all the identity politics going on. And that's never going to serve us well. We have to get over the tribalism and focus on solving problems ourselves. So that's what we're going to do here on A Neighbor's Choice. Over the series of this show, I will be introducing friends of mine, people who are on the cusp of putting in new technologies, new ideas. We don't need a Paris climate agreement, folks. We need people who are entrepreneurs putting their risk, putting their reputation, their finances, their courage on the line to solve pollution or to solve our addiction to foreign oil by exploring alternative forms of energy that don't require a Paris climate accord that won't do anything anyways. We don't need to pick winners and losers. We don't need government to tell us, let's prop up this favored industry or that favored industry. We don't need to pick fights over which government program we're going to cut or keep. We just need to get out of that groupthink identity and focus on solving problems ourselves. So on the show, you'll be hearing from leading edge scientists. A friend of mine, he's actually here with us today, Dr. Yu. He is the top NASA physicist in Kennedy Space Center, not far from where I'm broadcasting here in Orlando, Florida. And he has been a great science guru for me. He's shown me a lot of interesting insights that have opened up new ideas about what's possible. And the way he's been successful is he's not afraid to question groupthink. He's not afraid to challenge sacred cows of physics that some people in the trade would never even dare challenge. He just boldly does it. And when he does that, he's able to open up ideas for technology and exploration that we wouldn't even know is possible if we just hid in the fear of wanting to go along with the status quo. But it's time for a change, folks. If we don't change, all you see is accusation, scandal, and petty shame campaigns on social media. It's never going to get us anywhere, folks. We have to be the leaders. We have to be the role models in our neighborhood. We have to be the ones who are willing to say, you know what? You've insulted me. You've shamed me. You've voted for that politician or this politician I didn't like. But you know what? I'm going to put that beside myself and go on. And I'm going to do what's necessary to change society myself. We are the role models that we've been waiting for. We don't need the central state to tell us what to do or to tell us which boogeyman to fight. We don't need Washington edicts to tell us how to educate our children. We don't need Washington central planning to tell us which science textbooks we should believe. We need to question these things. If we have the courage to question these sacred cows, we can solve energy. We can solve the need for tackling these chronic illnesses that we've had a government war on cancer, for example, for decades. And where are we with that? Yes, there's some breakthroughs along the way, but fundamentally, the government has failed in this one-size-fits-all approach. They failed on telling us the truth about nutrition. They gave us a food pyramid that wasn't worth anything. So why, Bernie Sanders and his ilk, they want to have government fully control medicine. Right now, it's about, 60, 70% rigged by the government. And he wants to make it 100%. And he wants to let the guys who gave us the food pyramid, which we know now is totally wrong, totally useless. He wants those guys to give us the next step of controlling our medicine completely with these outdated paradigms. It's not going to work, folks. We've got to roll up our sleeves and get into it, and that's what we're going to do here on A Neighbor's Choice. In the next segment coming up, we're going to be speaking with Congressman Ron Paul, champion of liberty and an icon for freedom we should all respect. Stay tuned. 102.5 WFLA. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gornoski. You can visit A Neighbor's Choice, the website, at www.aneighborschoice.com. That's with the letter A at the beginning. That's aneighborschoice.com. You can also email me, david@aneighborschoice.com. And now I'm going to have a great opportunity to have this interview with Congressman Ron Paul, a champion of liberty and a good role model that we should all look to for influence as we go towards a new future for freedom. Well, I'm here with Dr. Ron Paul, former presidential candidate and former congressman from Texas, and the star of the daily show Ron Paul Liberty Report. You can find it at ronpaullibertyreport.com with his host, Daniel McAdams. I know I myself am a fan of the show, but I am so glad that you're able to join me here on this 242 years since the Declaration of Independence.
Well, it's nice to be with you. I'm sure we can have a nice conversation about very important issues like liberty.
Yeah, I've always considered you a role model for liberty and the way you address these matters. You're always looking at the ideas, not personalities. So 242 years since 1776, what do you think the state of liberty is today in America?
Well, it all depends on where you look. If you look to the political leadership of the country and go to D.C., you'll figure, well, it doesn't look so good. It might even be dead. There's not much of a defense there. We have about 5 people up there that know and care. But if you look elsewhere into some of the intellectual areas, young people who have been influenced by the message of liberty, the Mises Institute on the philosophy of Austrian economics, and looking at young people per se, the kind of individuals that I came across during the campaign in 08 and 12, you can be very much encouraged, because I think there's a large number of young people that don't fit into the camp of a supporter of Bernie Sanders. So I think that ideologically progress is being made and the libertarian message is being heard. Not many people have talked about libertarianism this past week when the courts have been changing their attitude about how many years in prison should you get for smoking a marijuana cigarette, and all of a sudden that attitude's changed, and I've been talking about that issue since the 1970s. So I would say when it comes to ideas, we've had some impact, and but we have a long way to go. But I think philosophically there's a grassroots effort of young people who know and understand it, but we have to keep working to give them a chance to express themselves and influence the next generation. But right now, though, things don't look good in Washington, and things don't look too good in economic policy and financial conditions and the debt. But that all can be something that we can use to our benefit, because the system that we have today is failing. The failure of that will require something new and different. But quite frankly, I do not think that Bernie Sanders and his crowd will take over. I think that the voice of liberty will be heard again, but it requires a lot more work.
Well, I can tell you, as a 29-year-old, I was influenced. I'm 29 now, but I was influenced by your campaign in 2007, and now I'm writing about liberty on the opinion pages of Daily Caller and Town Hall. So I think your work has really influenced a whole generation change. And I think with Trump, a lot of the things that are the most popular stances that he has a lot of groundswell support for, that he tends to at least nominally show interest in, are things that you were saying years ago when the Republican base was booing you. Now they're cheering Trump when he says, I just saw the headlines, let's get out of Germany, let's pull the troops out of Germany. So that was a position you were saying years ago, and now it's in vogue. So I think on the most popular, when he said, I'm thinking about getting rid of the marijuana federal laws, that was something you said. So you were kind of ahead of your time, but it's a time it's like you always say, the idea's time has come, and that's what we're seeing, I think.
Right, and then that's why we should be encouraged. And the other thing that I try to emphasize is the fact that you can't be discouraged because you figure you have to get the conversion of 51% of the population. Well, most people are just followers, and that's just the way it is. It's the people in leadership position, the people in our universities, the people who do represent us in Washington. They're the ones who will determine policy, and you need about 8 or 10% at the most. It was said that during the time of our revolution, that the large majority of the people were either indifferent or didn't agree, but there was a nucleus, now called the Founding Fathers, who had a very precise understanding, of what liberty was all about.
Yeah, and, I can see even now with some of the more popular, you're talking about role models, and that's really how people transmit culture. They look for role models that they want to be like and that they're inspired by, and they kind of gravitate around. They create little cultures. People say cult of personality. There's a way in which that's a bad thing, but there's a way in which that's just the normal nature of human beings, is they like to look for role models they can be like. And when I look at the role models that are most popular in my generation, people like Jordan Peterson, and he's all about personal responsibility. Clean up your own house before you want to tell the world how to be. That's what you used to say. You used to say, I don't want to run your life. I don't know how to. Just take care of yourself, So it's like, Jordan Peterson, there's millions of people. He's a Canadian, but he's taking that same individual responsibility message. Then you got people like, Joe Rogan, who, was a big fan of yours, and he is one of the most popular podcasts in the world, and he still is grounded by the influence of liberty. So you can see that the tide is turning. Although it looks dark in politics, the culture seems to be moving in a good way.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it, and there's going to be a big need for some answers. So still, it's difficult. We do have our programs, and that's what's necessary. But the government's always out there, challenging us. But when I meet people like you who have done something, so many times I was asked questions in the campaigns. I agree with what you're saying, Ron, but what am I going to do? Tell me what I should do. What are my marching orders? I said, do whatever you're capable of doing, whatever you want to do. So you have a podcast and you're doing things, and I run into a lot of people I didn't even know, they existed or that they were paying any attention, but they have their own little projects going, and that is to me what is most important is that people are out there, because in spite of the power of the major media, we have even a little bit more advantage now than we did in the old days without the internet. The internet is a challenge, but like you mentioned, you said I have a program called the Ron Paul Liberty Report, and we get a lot of attention. We have a lot of interviews, and we get a lot of calls over that. And it's interesting, we get a lot of foreign calls too. A lot of people are starved for it. And I think if you look at this ideologically on ideas, all of a sudden this partisanship just dissipates, because that's all about politics and power and money. But I keep reminding people that philosophically on economics, Republicans and Democrats are essentially the same, even though we get some tidbits thrown to us, like less taxes and less regulation. But basically, the two parties endorse Keynesian economics. They don't say let's get rid of the Fed. They both endorse foreign intervention, and hopefully we can influence that where things will change. But too often the parties are the same. So, it was always said, Nixon said, we're all Keynesians now, so we all have to get rid of the gold standard and this sort of thing. And I'd like the day to come that we can say we're all freedom lovers now, and this is what the market looks like. If you believe in freedom and personal property and private contracts, it's entirely different than what we have today.
Yeah, and just going back to that recent controversy last week, seems like there's a scandal every week that the media whips people into a frenzy, and this was over the border issue where it was reported that Trump was separating children from families. Now, I don't support that policy. I think there's a better way to do that. But it was interesting to me because the media, they found an opportunity to try to make an emotional hysteria against Trump. But I thought, they're really playing in our domain, Dr. Paul, because, your whole message was about a cage-free society in the sense that you wanted to pardon all nonviolent offenders in your purview as a president. And so that means you would be uniting millions of families with their children. And I thought, it's funny because you'll never see Rachel Maddow and CNN and New York Times playing the audio of children crying because their parents are in a prison cage for tax, or a prison cage for raw milk, or a prison cage for alternative medicine. They'll never get their voices heard because it doesn't fit the narrative of state power. But that's really the fact that the public was so moved by that, said, wait a second, if they don't want children separated from their parents in cages, that means they're moving in our direction, because we're all about, if you haven't committed a crime, you shouldn't be put in a cage. So I think,
and their side never really would show any concern about how many children we kill. And when you look at our foreign policy, all the bombs we drop a bomb, every 12 minutes or so, and innocent people die, and a lot of children die. But so this whole thing about it's the children and the family, it's sort of disgusting. They're right. We should be concerned. We should have different policies. But they demagogue it, because if you look at the statistics, conditions like this, I've seen somewhere it showed that Obama, during his administration, he had a lot more people, being abused like this. But someday that mess will have to be cleaned up, and that has a lot to do with our foreign policy as well as our welfare policy. And I think a lot of that could be solved.
And you've been listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio with Ron Paul. We'll be right back in just a minute on News Talk 102.5 WFLA. And welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I am your host, David Gornoski, and let's continue with our discussion with Congressman Ron Paul, former congressman, the champion of liberty, Ron Paul himself. Speaking of children, overseas, the media that they said, oh, you must be Nazi if you support border security because children are crying on this audio tape. And I think how many children are crying in Russia right now because of sanctions, makes their tummy hungry because they can't get their right to economic, trade because of our government's hysteria and their imperialistic dictates of who can trade with Russia, with these sanctions. And I think to myself, the whole media, they act like they love children, but they don't care about those children in Russia, do they?
No, and the worst example of that is when the Iraq War was a lot hotter. Madeleine Albright was asked, during the bombing, I guess in 1990s, that was said that because of that and sanctions and all and destruction of the infrastructure, that 500 children and innocent people died from this bombing, and she didn't deny it. And she says, "Well, that's the price you have to pay." It wasn't like it is so outrageous. It's all these children dying. We denied them medical care. We bombed, their water facilities. It was none of that. So now all of a sudden they come across as the saints and trying to grab the moral high ground. But all that stuff that they produce is enforced by the point of a gun, undermining people's liberties. But they have no desire to give up any power, and they have no desire to understand that free people are much more capable of taking care of their needs than any time a government ever existed. But they still say, "Oh yeah, you guys don't care," and that's why we have to have free medical care for everybody and free education. And when you look at the educational system, it's such a mess. But that's why it's a real job. That's why we need people like you doing whatever you can to get a message out. And that's what is uncounted. We don't know how many people, but when I go to the campuses, we still get large crowds out and a lot of enthusiasm. But it's going to be touch and go for a while.
I would love to see a friendly debate. I don't know if it would ever go along with it, but to see a friendly college stadium debate between you and Bernie Sanders, I think that would be one for the ages. So I don't know, whoever puts that together, they should do that, because I think the public, especially young people, need to see the philosophy of freedom compared to the philosophy of central planning so they can see the stark contrast, because so many people get so swept up by their emotions and they forget that these things are always violent, the socialism.
Of course, Bernie can criticize, all this capitalism, people making a lot of money and that kind of stuff. You say, well, Bernie, you've been doing pretty good for a socialist. You're up to $1 million a year on your income at this point. So it's just so much demagoguery that's going on. And a socialist, if you could get them to answer an honest question, like the person that Crowley, ask her, well, you say you're a socialist. Would you be willing to put a wage control on all the very, very wealthy athletes? They make millions and millions of dollars. What? That's unfair. Think of how many poor people in the ghetto need some help, so we should tax them more. They never, or movie stars. No, we always have to attack industrialists because they're the bad people, even if they're the ones producing the jobs.
Right, and I think about this. I think one of the biggest arguments that Bernie has, or that socialist style message has had resonance with, is healthcare. But they say, government should take care of our healthcare. They should pay for it. But I think to myself, how many missed opportunities have we had by having, look at the food pyramid. That was they found out that was all wrong, and the government created that. And then look at the FDA. It's all staffed by people who are pharmaceutical executives. And I think to myself, I think we could have solved probably cancer and Alzheimer's and stuff probably decades ago if we had had a free private property society where solutions would go to things that actually work rather than to things that are politically connected. And so freedom is the really humanitarian issue for medicine.
And a lot of people argue that freedom doesn't have any regulators, but it does. If you go broke, you have to go broke. You don't get bailed out, and the big corporations don't have the benefits. But if you have to write regulations under today's circumstances, if it's drug regulations, the drug companies write the regulation, banking regulation. The other guys are the real culprit. Oh, well, let the bankers write the regulation. So it's the special interests that write the regulations, and when that happens, they're the ones who support both parties, because that's part of that deep state that nobody pays attention to. Everybody talks about, what's going on with ICE and what's happening to the families, and so that they can demagogue it. So that's a problem, but that's the way human nature is, and we have to confront it.
Do you think that if government got out of the way of universities and grant making and all the picking winners and losers for science, that we would actually be able to advance science a lot faster than we do now and have technologies and clean energy a lot faster? Do you think that would be...
Yeah. It would be different, because now there's a lot of technology being done and research, but it's usually done by government money, but they're usually using the money to build weaponry and to enhance the ability to spy on people. I always try to talk about, there's been tremendous progress even the last 100 years or so, but all this energy goes into developing weaponry. Just think if we put that much energy into developing and understanding what peace is all about and why more people would be taken care of. But yes, I think it would be redirected. Right now, the money that could be used in a positive way is taken out, and then it's given to the government, and then they go in, and then they do control the universities, and that is a huge mess. This cultural Marxism and all that stuff that they pander out, pass out. That is a huge problem, and yet the people seem to go along with it. But that's going to end. But a lot more people now are thinking about, boy, the way things are going in government schools, maybe I ought to have my kids in private school. Maybe they ought to use homeschooling. And you say, well, there's not enough people. Yes, there is enough, because the numbers are important, but it doesn't mean that if everybody doesn't all of a sudden get a decent education in private schooling. And if you go back in our history, just think of all the big hospitals. And even in Houston, most hospitals are still named, after churches. And universities were started by churches, and they were independent. But now, of course, everything is government, even the ones that still have a church name attached to it. So in Houston, there's the Baptist and the Methodist Hospital. Well, it's not run by the church. It's run by government money.
We're obviously going to have an eventual debt crisis with all of the spending that we're doing, and I have mixed feelings, because I think Trump is cutting regulations and somewhat, and taxes a little bit, nibbling there, and I do want to have people have some prosperity, but we're still going to have to go through a dark time, and especially if it's under Trump's watch, how do we safeguard the message of liberty and free markets when this inevitable market correction eventually comes again, so that we don't slander free markets? Trump's going to say, I'm a free market guy, and it's going to slander the name of liberty. So how do we safeguard it for the future when this correction comes? Do you have any strategy?
No, that's not easy, because that's what we're all trying to do, is change people's mind. And sometimes I think that you just have to change one mind at a time. And if you get an audience, your program, you have a bigger audience than one person at a time. I always thought in my job it would be one person at a time, because it was such a lonely fight, 30, 40 years ago. When I first went up there in the 70s, it was there was not many responses. But I think and the other thing is you never know how many people are listening, so you have to keep trying, but there's never going to be one perfect answer. But people have to see, in order for them to think that there could be a crisis in the monetary system, they have to understand monetary policy a little bit, what the founders said about silver and gold being legal tender, and why deficits are very bad. We have to refute Keynesianism and show that it's not going in the right direction. So I think that it's education. Ultimately, it's education to understand it, and trying to convince people that history shows that more prosperity has occurred the freer the country is, and we certainly had a lot of prosperity in our early years, and we still have tremendous prosperity. At least there's economic wealth, but because of the system, the crony capitalism and the banking system, the monetary system, it's been accumulated in fewer hands. At the same time, the people who aren't really counted much anymore, the statistics are all, everything's perfect. Things are going so well. But when you look at it, the labor participation rate keeps going down, so people aren't counted. So there's a lot of people, and it's this discrepancy. So there is wealth. But when a crisis comes, a lot of that wealth will be wiped out. The only thing I can say is you have to refute it with a better idea and try to use history in this regard, but I also like to defend it on the moral grounds that we're individuals, we have a right to our life and our liberty, but we have to hope that we can, in a free society, keep what we earn, but if we don't do well, we don't have any right to anybody else's wealth. Yes, a lot of people say, yes, that's freedom, but what if don't you have to take care of people when they really have trouble? Or if there's a country in trouble and they want to have liberty, don't we have to spend money and send our kids over there to defend them? No, you don't have the moral right to do that. So I think it's economics, history, and morality that has to be understood.
Well, Dr. Ron Paul, ladies and gentlemen, I've enjoyed this discussion. Champion of liberty here on the anniversary of the Independence Declaration of our country. RonPaulLibertyReport.com is where you can find his program, which also is on YouTube at 12 o'clock every day, correct?
Right, Eastern time. 12 Eastern.
12 Eastern.
Right.
Thank you very much. And
all right. Well, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the solutions are simple. We do not need the state to tell us what to do. We don't need groupthink. We can solve these problems ourselves as neighbors. Thank you for joining me on this maiden voyage, this first episode on A Neighbor's Choice Radio. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have. And we'll be seeing you each week, Thursdays at 8 o'clock. Now listen, it's time to start a Declaration of Independence, folks. A new one, free from the groupthink of Washington, D.C. No more swamps. It's time for a new era of independence. So we'll see you next week on 102.5 WFLA, Thursday, 8 o'clock Eastern. We'll see you there.
Sing so much better. I dance so much better. Yeah. I'd be a little freer, a little less mean. Transformed by the renewing of your mind.